At 5:33, I'll call the meeting to order. To the approval of the minutes from February 5th, 2025.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to approve the meeting minutes from February 5th, 2025.
I'll second. We have a motion and a second. Ready for the question? All in favor, let it known by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Ayes have it, motion carried. 3, subdivision and land development. A, waiver of land development minor plan, 240 North Plum Street, Catherine Hershey School.
Good evening. I'm Ben Morton, landscape architect at RGS Associates, representing the Catherine Hershey Schools for Early Learning. Joining me tonight are Rebecca Benedum, the Senior Director of Programming, Bill McKelvey, the Facilities Manager, and Sean McBrien, the Communications and Media Relations Manager. They'll be available if I'm not able to answer all the questions that you have. It was last February that we presented this project to the Planning Commission and obtained conditional approval for the facility at 240 North Plum Street. Since that time, we resolved the conditions of approval, recorded the plans, obtained the building permit, and the project broke ground in November. One of the things that hadn't been resolved when we were presenting the plan to you was how to use the third floor in what's known as Building 4 on the property. And since that time, with sort of the community reaction towards wanting to have more students in the facility, it's been determined that replicating what's on floors 1 and 2 of that building as classroom space on the third floor was the way to go. And so we're here tonight requesting a waiver of minor plan submission so that they can move forward with obtaining the building permit to fit out that floor. We're not making any changes to the site plan, but there is an additional parking demand as well as utility capacity requirements, which led to the project exceeding the thresholds for a no impact land development. So in that case, then we submitted a sketch plan, met with Lauren as well as the city engineer to discuss a minor plan submission, and kind of landed on the idea of being able to waive land development since there really wasn't anything happening with the plan itself. That additional parking that I mentioned is going to be addressed off-site at 241 North Plum Street, which is a property that since we were last here, CHS has purchased. We will be going to the zoning hearing board this coming Monday to obtain the special exception related to that. And then the capacity requests that I mentioned have been made with staff. So I think the one thing to note in terms of sort of a condition of this waiver is that the city engineer requested that CHS purchase and provide to the city 16 of the delineators to be used along the bike lane in 3 locations, just west of North Ann Street, just on the approach to the Plum Street intersection, and then between the Plum Street intersection and the site access for this project. And so the intent then is that the city is going to install them themselves, but CHS will be delivering those prior to the building permit being issued. So happy to answer any questions that you have.
This is one of the sort of agenda items that gets really confusing for me, because I know that you now have the other building across the street, and so like there's a giant web now. Not that I don't, obviously as I stated in previous meetings, enjoy the project. Just based off what you were saying there, my only real concern that comes off the cuff is if the city engineer feels as though it's reasonable for there to be an exchange of material to upkeep safety standards. I feel like that needs to be more than a one-time arrangement personally, and that might not even be in our purview. I'm just kind of stating it for the record. I hope that becomes a more long-standing relationship than just a one-time material purchase, because, you know, after this one-time arrangement, if we ever have to maintain it, those additional costs then go to the general public. And this development, if the impact there feels like the safety standards need remarketed or more highlighted for the public, then I feel like that needs to be a long-standing arrangement. That's all I really have to say right now.
Some more, you said you needed more parking spaces, and that would be next on at 241?
Yes. We already have some off-site spaces that are even a little bit further east than the 241, which were part of the original project, and then beyond what was required for that are going to be at the 241 site.
And how many additional?
Parking spaces?
Yeah.
There were 12 surplus spaces already approved for use at the 226 North Ann Street site, so we're using those. And then there are 21 spaces that will be utilized at 241 North Plum Street.
I forgot that I had loaded these on, so there are some photos that have been provided. And so is there one in particular, Ben, 1, 2, or 3 that is most helpful for you?
Not necessarily. And these, I should say, actually were the drawings that were provided by Cindy McCormick, just showing where the delineators are going to be installed.
I'm just curious, what is already at 241 North Plum? What is that?
It's been used as office space. I'm forgetting some of the prior tenant names, but it was primarily office space, a little bit of warehouse space for a security company. The prior owner was also, in a portion of it that's more warehouse, was storing some sort of, what's the right word, vintage fire trucks and that sort of thing. But we're still in the very early planning stages of how that property and the existing buildings can be reused.
Okay, so that parking that's there is going to be used temporarily for this?
No, the idea is that, there's plenty of parking now for it to be used, and then with any sort of future development of that property and reuse of it, the appropriate amount of parking for this, what we're talking about tonight, will be maintained. And that is a requirement of the approval that we'll get from the zoning hearing board, is that they need to maintain that parking. And if for some reason it wasn't available there, the CHS would need to demonstrate to the zoning officer that it was being provided somewhere else that fit all the terms of the special exception.
I have a question. With the third floor being built out now, what will remain in that building that will not be put to use? Is there still a fourth floor above that, or attic space or something like that?
So there are 2 floors above that, and those were already being utilized for office space.
So that, okay,
Yeah,
so that
yeah.
will still be, okay.
Yeah, so that's already, everything will now be programmed at this point, yeah.
Ben, do you have to revise your planning module then for?
We didn't need to, because we had previously obtained a planning module exemption for this site when it was slated for residential development. And then we were able to confirm that that applied for the initial project and then subsequently for this as well. So it's just the local capacity request.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's great. I mean,
Yeah.
I personally am in favor of waiving the minor plan if there's no planning module. Won't hold up your building permit, but that's just my opinion.
Yeah, I'm also in favor of that, but I'm just curious about when's the plan opening? Do you have a kind of timeline?
Can one of you remind me when we're intending for opening?
Beginning in 2026 is when all the ones, the county ones are.
Okay, the beginning of 2026.
Great, thank you.
The more I think about it, aside from the bollards, I actually have concerns that even the paint itself will also wear away for the bike lane because of increased vehicle traffic in and out daily for parking demand. I don't want to hold up the project in its entirety, but I'm wondering if Hershey would be willing to maybe go into a more long-standing agreement with the city to make sure that the bike infrastructure is maintained. Yeah, because this was one of my previous concerns when we were going through approval was how the development could impact the bike lanes with the vehicular traffic in and out. And so, now with the engineer saying that delineators would be a good idea, it kind of reinforces that opinion for me that, there's a level of, I'm not saying this is the end of the bike lane world over here, but there's a level of concern for safety with the bike lane, so I'm just wondering if Hershey would be willing to go into a more long-standing relationship to maintain those sections of the bike lane, not just a one-time material purchase.
I mean, I guess my reaction to that, though, is that, the maintenance of line striping in the public right-of-way really is the city's responsibility, and it's the city's determination to have a bike lane, and access to this property is something that, is reasonable for them to be able to have. And I know at the prior discussion, you had talked about access occurring via Tobacco Avenue, but even kind of no matter where this site gets accessed, there will be traffic crossing the bike lane, either at Plum Street, at Shippen, and so I don't know that really changes things beyond just, and it's a reasonable amount of site access.
Yeah, no, I definitely was a proponent of using Tobacco Avenue, but I was also hoping, in part of that argument for site reconfigurations, to eliminate those crossings across the bike lane, or at least trying to eliminate how many quote-unquote intersections there are with driveways by maybe getting an easement with your neighbor. But now I'm also concerned because the web gets bigger here because now we're talking about off-site accommodations for vehicles at another location, which wasn't a part of our previous conversation. So now we're talking about another additional section of the bike infrastructure network. I do understand that the municipality is required to upkeep these things, but when I think about increased development and the impacts it has, this is a nonprofit entity, so this development is really for the good of the community as a whole. No one is getting funds here, like this is a good thing. But at the same time, the development has impacts, and it's really a minor call. Like when I'm just trying to do some mental math here, like I have a day job in public works, like paint every handful of years I could imagine, delineators maybe a decade, only if they get hit. So, because to the point about if we're just going by who's responsible for what, I feel like we're now at the point of the planning process too, where if this were part of the larger plan as a whole, we could have made a condition of approval or something, or had a larger discussion at that time about, again, more off-site requirements, the web expanding. But now we're limited in scope in a way because we're past that planning stage and we're now into a waiver process. So it's a bit complicated for me, but I'm just trying to see if we can work things out for the betterment of the long-term sustainability of the bike network in relation to the way it impacts the individual taxpayer.
I'm going to disagree with Commissioner Dasher. I don't think it's our responsibility or our purview to require folks to be painting bike lanes. This is an underutilized parcel. great community benefit that we're getting here, and I don't think we want to add additional requirements.
I would also add that there's no precedent for that.
Yeah, I don't think we can do that.
I think this is an amazing community amenity. I completely agree with you, Mr. Stolzfus. I would really like to see this project move forward. I would love to see it opened like in a couple weeks, actually, because of what you're offering to those individuals who are truly needing your support in our community. And I would like to see our commission make this as easy as possible for you and your team while abiding by all of our guidelines.
Any further commission comments? Public comment?
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion to approve the request for a waiver of minor land development plan.
I would love to second that motion.
So we have a motion on the floor to approve the extension to 40 North Plum Street, Catherine Hershey School. Ready for the question? All in favor, let it know by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it, motion carried. Right.
Thank you very much.
Sure. B, text and map amendment for New Price Elementary School.
So this is I gave you some additional handouts for this portion of the meeting. I don't know if you want to take a couple of minutes. I know you just got the materials. I don't know if you want to take just a couple of minutes to look through them. Unfortunately, they were not ready for the meeting packet, so I apologize for that. I feel like a teacher, you could just look up when you're done reading so that I know.
Hear what she said.
So the memo is there just to provide you with some background and some information about kind of how we got to this text amendment that, should you pass it, will then go ahead to City Council for their approval. The impetus for this is for the school district and the city and the Lancaster Rec to be able to work together to create a holistic campus. What we're trying to do is maintain the park amenities that are, and even improve them, that are in Brandon Park, while also giving this neighborhood a brand new elementary school and creating opportunities for growth for the Lancaster Rec, because they will have a larger property and they will be able to grow their child care facilities and their programming. And because this plan preceded our rewrite of the ordinances, as we're going to be discussing more, that reduces the need for the text amendment. I'm happy to take questions, and Betsy Logan is here as well for questions.
So the main point of this is we're not just planning for Price Elementary, but we're planning for the future, and to be able to go beyond and kind of codify something that would allow any future consolidation or swap or along that line, or just multiple uses to be allowed?
And so, yes, that's where we're going with the rewrite, to create this institutional use.
Okay.
And so, once we go into the institutional use, that will create these campus-type settings. And so with the rewrite, that's what we'll gain.
Makes sense.
What is, so just help me understand here. The school district of Lancaster moved into the Rex building. They're swapping, correct?
And so the Lancaster rec is moving to that property, but they're rebuilding the school. So they're building a completely new Price Elementary School.
Yes. Is the old, on the plan here that's circled, this is only where Price was. So what is the zoning of the rec property? And then, I guess, does this new zoning complement? I'm assuming it would.
Yes, and so the other map might be better. We determined that, and the other attachment, that map, I think, clarifies it a little bit more.
Oh, this is super helpful.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Betsy.
Very helpful.
So I just have a couple questions. So if I understand you correctly, the zoning ordinance does not currently have an institutional use?
Correct.
Okay. And once we get around to the full zoning rewrite, would the institutional use replace
Yes.
this? Okay, so we're really kind of looking at a semi-temporary,
Yes.
at least for this specific property.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. That helps a lot. And the only question I had, looking through the specific standards, regarding building coverage, that we're proposing here to go from 20 to potentially up to 50 as allowed by special exception. Is that tied to the specific uses we're talking about, or is it just carte blanche? If you apply for a special exception, you'd be able to cover up to 50% of the lot.
For this. I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand the question.
Maybe I'm not reading this correctly, but it's saying under section 3, in the PO district beyond the existing 20% maximum building coverage and 35% total lot coverage by right, maximum lot coverage of up to 50% is allowed by special exception. So maybe is that currently in the zoning ordinance, or former zoning official here nitpicking the zoning?
So that's where the change is. And so it's currently 20%, and the amendment would make it 50%.
So my question is that special exception tied to any specific use? Like if someone wants to
I see what you're
construct a
saying.
school? Because
So
I think I'm just
whether it's a school or something else were to go there.
Yeah, I guess my sort of concern is that if anyone could apply to push the lot coverage up to 50% in the open space district, then to me that it feels like we're sort of moving out of an open space district, if that makes any sense. So are there only specific uses that are special exception uses, like maybe, I don't know if I'm making any sense here.
I think I know where you're going. I can try to help out with that. So it's not related to any specific use, as some would, a special exception use. However, the uses that are in the PO district are very limited. So there's really not a lot of options other than what we're adding in right now. So recreation has always been a use, but the recreation wants to expand kind of their resources that they provide. So that's the reason behind some of those recreation amendments. But generally, I think it will only be a school, recreation, and, kind of those general parks and open space requirements, nature preserve, that kind of thing.
Perfect, that's what
Yeah, and Lauren did a great assessment of the lots that would be affected by this zoning amendment. And if you want, she can probably give you some more detail on that. But there's very, very few that have the acreage that aren't in the floodplain, that are owned by non-public entities that wouldn't be doing adjustments to them, or mostly right away, that type of thing.
that helps a lot. Sorry, and yeah, my final question is just interested in hearing more about what comments the LCPC had and how they're addressed.
Sure. So one of the concerns from the LCPC did have to do with kind of this encroachment idea, like, are we going to start losing park space? You know, what if schools decide to just start building kind of in the parks? And that's what led the city to do an analysis of the PO districts. And so we took all of the PO districts and we kind of divided them up. And just to give you just some like rough numbers, 60 of, there were 101 parcels. 60 of them are less than 1 acre. And so right away, you get rid of those. And then another 14 parcels were between 1 and 5 acres. The reason that that's important is because there's a 5-acre minimum to build an elementary school. Okay, and so then when you go to kind of the other end and you look at the largest 10 parcels, 5 of those parcels are owned either by the county or by the county parks department. One is owned by the Rockford Foundation, one is owned by the Longs Park Foundation, one is a cemetery, and 2 are owned by the city, but they're located on the Sunnyside Peninsula. So when you look at the parcels that are actually available to do something like this, you're very limited. And so the county kind of, because of the county's comments, we did go in that direction to make sure.
Great. Those are my questions. Thank you.
Lauren, just to be clear, we're recommending this change to city council to approve, correct?
Correct.
Any further commission comments? Any public comments?
I'll make a motion to approve the text and map amended for the new Price Elementary School.
And I will second that motion.
We have a motion on the floor. Ready for the question? All in favor, let it know by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it, motion carried. 4, staff report to planning commission.
I'm going to defer to Betsy tonight.
Hello, I wanted to provide you with an update of kind of where we're at regarding not just the zoning ordinance, but also the saldo and the official map, because those are 3 of like the large planning components that are called out in the comprehensive plan. So we have, we're currently working right now on a map grant from DCD. The deadline's March 3rd. To request some additional funds to support this endeavor, since we're adding not just the zoning, but the official map and saldo to the program. I had a draft timeline for you, but I made a bunch of changes to it at the last minute, like not accounting for some things. But generally, we're estimating about trying to get the RFP out for that in the next, I'd say by like mid-April. And then allowing for that. So hopefully hiring a consultant about the same time that the MAP rewards are announced. Hopefully we will be in that group. But we do have funding, to start the process. But it would just be additional, be great if we could, have a matching grant. So that process would start with kind of establishing the committee, review of all of our ordinances, the variances and waivers that are typically requested, all of the planning documents that we have that would relate to the ordinance changes, and then also discussions with kind of the hiccups we see as city staff and where those, barriers are to an efficient system as best as we can under the MPC. So then we'd start with the official map, hoping that it would be the simplest process. And once that's about to the point where we're starting to do public, like the actual public notification requirements for the MPC, the 45-day time limit, then we'll start on the zoning ordinance. I anticipate that being the longest process. Looking at like 8 to 10 months, but most likely it'll probably be a year. And then once that's also at the point where it's ready for the official like MPC public notification process, we'd start on the saldo. I don't anticipate that one taking quite as long. But in that update, we look at, incorporating Vision Zero requirements and complete street requirements, clarifying the process that we're currently doing for land development, subdivision, and then just looking at ways we can maybe streamline that process. So that's where we're at with that. I also have been working on a 2025 action plan for the planning department. So it incorporates not just Lauren's role in land development, but also our public art and historic preservation, our land bank. So that's something that we're working on as the department. Each bureau kind of come up with their own plan. I'm hoping to be able to share that with you next month, so you guys can kind of see how we're incorporating all of the comp plan amendments into our plan for 2025. And then we're also working on a spreadsheet that shows all of the action items that were outlined in the comprehensive plan and where things are already complete. So it's more of a status update. If we're in the process of doing stuff, it's in the planning phase, that type of thing. So I hope to have those available all for you in the next month. So, but with the ADU discussion, we were thinking that would be a great way for the Planning Commission to start getting involved in the process. So I'm going to defer to Andrew unless anyone has questions for me.
Yeah, if I could just, maybe more of a comment, Betsy, than a question. So, and this is not meant to be a critique at all, but we're now a year and a half almost past the approval of the comp plan. We're in a housing crisis, and, a number of our strategies that are listed in the comp plan around adding additional housing units, like we can't do because of our zoning code. So it's a little concerning, and I know that there's been a lot of staff turnover, and this is definitely, again, not a critique to you or to Lauren, but it's just concerning that, we're just now starting this process, and it's going to take another year. So that's my comment. The question is there like low-hanging fruit in the zoning code that could be prioritized and done faster? I think of we still have this ordinance that prohibits more than like 3 unrelated people living together, which to me is
the definition of family.
Like, can we identify those things that like we all know need to change and that are constricting our housing supply and fast track those?
We're definitely open to it. I think it depends on, how much of that low-hanging fruit is, I guess, the quantity of that low-hanging fruit. So whether or not it makes sense to continuously do zoning ordinance amendments as we go along, and, pay the cost of doing the public notice and that. But I think it really depends on quantity.
Betsy, is there any way, and I'm speaking from my own experience, but if there is any way to utilize volunteers from the City Alliance ELTs, specifically the Community and Economic Development one, I know there are several members that are eager to help you. I know it's come up at our last couple of meetings.
Yeah.
I'm one of them, but there's a bunch of us, and we really want to help. So if there's anything we can do, just let us know.
I mean, I honestly think kind of starting with like these kind of hiccups in our ordinance, like if it's the definition of family or ADUs that we can call attention to and kind of get a game plan for. So once we start that rewrite process, it's a simple fix and not something that you don't need to go into that research and background on. So I think that would be a good place to start.
So based off of what Mr. Stolzfus said a moment ago, the housing crisis that our community is currently in, I'd be curious to know, have you sat down with some of the developers within our local community to ask where their major pain points are? From a fast tracking standpoint, I'm not so much interested in the low hanging fruit. I'm interested in what can actually drive this community in its right direction and make it affordable for more than what it is currently available. And I think sitting down with some of our local developers and trying to understand where they're running into bumps and hurdles in order for them to overcome some of their projects that can be maybe more towards the middle market rather than a higher end, apartment complex. But something that helps them be able to produce something that's more cost efficient for them, where they can have better rates. I know parking requirements are a big deal. I know we have some mixed use opportunities based off of what the comprehensive plan is saying and limiting or lowering some of those parking requirements, lowering some of those commercial components to it. And I just think that it would be worthwhile to have a conversation to better understand where they are, what their pain points are, and then how we can continue to move that ball forward. I'm really excited to see this happen as well. I think everybody here is. I think we all share that same sentiment. We probably all have different thoughts and feelings on how to move this ball forward. And I think that, if anybody on this commission can help you or help connect you with somebody that can help you, I think that we're all willing to do that.
Thank you. Yeah, my plan is to talk to both developers and engineers who are kind of dealing with the day-to-day details in going through that process. So it is on my agenda for next month.
So, I think I'm in agreement where Commissioner Stolz said is that, because I think his point about low-hanging fruit isn't necessarily about, it's more about what is the simplest thing we can do legally that's not a general comprehensive code update in this interim period. And to your point, we can do those things, like we're doing one right now.
Right.
But if we do them one-off, there is additional advertising costs and whatnot, as well as just you're assembling a new document every time. My question is to low-hanging fruit actually, and the comprehensive plan is, how easy would it be for us to, for example, put a moratorium on developing single-family housing in all zones except R1?
Well, I think that kind of gets into the discussion we're going to have on ADUs, because in all residential districts, we allow more than one principal use. Mm-hmm. So a moratorium on single-family homes I wouldn't want to get into the legalities of it. I'd want to check with the solicitor. My understanding is it's really not something that is recommended.
Okay. Yeah.
But I don't know if any of the other people in the room have more experience with that.
Because I've thought about this a lot, and I think the area where single-family housing, I should specify detached, not single-family housing, single-family detached housing. ADUs are where I started going, I wouldn't want to eliminate that option in already developed parcels of the city where doing a single-family detached house without going through a subdevelopment plan makes sense. But at the same time, I don't want to see some of the undeveloped parts of the city somewhat suburbanized. So that's just my general thoughts. I would be interested in hearing what the solicitor has to say. So maybe more direct question, could we amend the zoning ordinance temporarily via attachment to the zoning code?
I'm not 100% sure what specifically you're asking about.
So we're anticipating doing an overarching zoning code update in a year with the comprehensive plan update. I'm wondering if there's kind of a quick and dirty way of amending the zoning code in the interim, where maybe in more of like an attachment capacity, like, hey, we are specifying that, for example, in all zones, single-family detached housing is no longer permitted until rescinded, and we're anticipating an update coming later, so why go through all the details of amending every single line of zoning code if, and it's an if, it really is a question.
Yeah.
I don't know if we could just by essentially declaration say, we intend for this to happen, it requires a lot of updates, we're expecting a bigger update later, so this stands in place over the things that we don't have the time to update. Am I making sense?
You are making sense. I've never experienced that in any situation that I've been in the state of Pennsylvania or other states that I've worked in. Typically, you have to go section by section to say, I'm amending this section to read X, Y, Z. So you'd have to amend either the table or, our zoning ordinance is written a little different. So typically, you would have, what's allowed in each zoning district, so as more detailed, so it could just be a matter of amending the table.
Okay.
I would also just add to that, you have to understand kind of the domino effect of zoning. And so within a zoning ordinance, it's inevitably going to reference another one.
Yeah.
And so as soon as you start making amendments in the zoning ordinance, so it's messy work. So to just do an overlay is pretty much impossible, because if one ordinance refers to something else that's not getting overlaid, you end up with a big mess.
Yeah, and we have identified where some of those issues are, but I think one of the big things that we're struggling with is inconsistencies between ordinances and what is going to be the overall, deciding factor on whether or not that issue is getting resolved. So whether it's, subdivision and land development and stormwater, or subdivision and land development and zoning, or zoning and shade tree, all of those have to be looked at to make sure that we're not making things worse. I completely understand where you're going. I just don't think it's as simple as, doing a quick text amendment like that.
Just for clarification purposes, when you talked about everything kind of muddling together, and you specified the Shade Tree Commission, the Historic Commission, Zoning Commission, et cetera, does that transfer to the various, like a mixed-use area, or R1 or R2, or is
It's more like in the land development process and whether or not that use is permitted. So if that use is a different use than what's currently existing, then that triggers more ordinance requirements generally, which would then, if they're doing a minor land development plan, then that triggers more of the tree requirements. But it really kind of depends on it's not like per zoning district. Like if we brought into the zoning districts and, made just residential and mixed use and maybe some, commercial, then you're still going to have some of those issues. Because the zoning's not just the permitted uses, it's other regulations as well, which include landscaping and buffers and parking and all of that.
Yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Getting my own self confused there, so I appreciate the clarification.
I have a question. Out of curiosity, does the city currently track information like the type of housing units that are being built in the city, and also how completed developments like multifamily, some of the apartment complexes that have gone up recently, how they're performing in terms of their lease rate? And I ask that because I think it would be really helpful to really have a strong database of what housing is being built in the city, and also how well does that match up to the kind of housing that that we need. I've seen some really great studies. I think there might have actually been one from East Lancaster that really was showing basically here's what the market is producing in terms of housing, and then here's what here's the size of households in our community.
Mm-hmm.
There's almost always a huge mismatch.
Yeah.
Granted, those are for more, sprawled out townships, not necessarily a city like Lancaster. Because I think that's important to whatever housing-related changes we make to the zoning ordinance. I absolutely agree there are definitely some low-hanging fruit changes like ADUs, removing the cap on number of unrelated people that can live in a house, very simple, straightforward things. But we certainly want to make sure we don't make any changes that turns out that's not what the market is building, and also that's not what our residents need in terms of the housing types. So I was just curious, if that's any thought process going on, or if that's something that the city's already been doing.
So we have the interim housing strategy, which kind of looks at those comparisons. So we've been using that. We do track residential units, but not necessarily. Currently, we're not measuring what type of unit, what housing unit it is. That is something that I'm working on with codes to try to get a better understanding of. Our system is a little clunky, a lot clunky, to be able to like run reports and stuff. There's like one person that is really good at it, so I'm on her list of people to work with. But yeah, that would be the ideal, is to have the different types of housing that's built. And then as far as like success of those, I think we would probably work most with like LCA to kind of get an understanding of that.
Software is often the Achilles heel of any planning department.
Well, and that's part of the problem. You know, we're in the process of updating our software. We're switching from Units to City View. That's also taking time. So we hope to be able to do a lot more data collection and metrics once that's in place, not just number of housing units, but also like length of time things are taking to go through the process, because I think that's a really important factor to look at and to see if these amendments, you know, make a difference in that.
Excellent, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? I would just add, if you have these low hanging fruit, please text me. Like, we have a list running of things that we know are issues. So just send me an email with the information that you're aware of. I'm happy to kind of add it to a list. And if there's a short-term text amendment that we can feasibly do that's not going to be like a huge impact, then I think we would definitely look at doing that. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Other business, accessory dwelling units, ADUs.
If you give me just a second, I'm just bringing up my little note section so I can see it better. I appreciate that, thanks. Okay, great. That's perfect. All right. Well, my name is Andrew Whalen, and I have served now on the Planning Commission for the last 4 years. And one of the things that I would like to give introduction to with this discussion is that one of my goals with signing up for this was to work with like-minded people like all of us here, and probably in the audience as well, to find ways that we could really work to provide housing of all kinds for people in the city. And one of the ways that I believe we can kind of reach that common goal is through accessory dwelling units. And I think it's a great solution to our housing problem. And one of the things I believe we do a lot of times is we react as a planning commission. Someone comes in with an idea and we react to those demands, and we are here as maybe less planning, more reactionary. And I believe that today, by maybe setting up these steps for something cohesive with ADUs, we can maybe get ahead of it a little bit. For our audience, and maybe even members of the commission who are wondering what are exactly ADUs, accessory dwelling units, really the definition, which I think kind of brings a couple of the ideas together, is it's an independent, self-sufficient dwelling unit with a complete kitchen and bath facilities. ADUs can be converted portions of an existing home, which is called an internal ADU. It could be an addition to a new or existing home, which would be called an attached ADU, or it could be a standalone accessory structure or converted portions of an existing standalone accessory structure, which would be called a detached ADUs. Essentially, we're thinking preferred ideas would be like an apartment, or if you've heard of the granny flat before, where another member of the family can live there and they can be on that same property and share a lot of things, but they still have their own bathroom, they still have their own kitchen, they still have their own means to get out of that house without having to cut through your living room. These are not meant to be bed and breakfast, they're not meant to be boarding houses, that's a completely separate definition, but I know this might stir up things a little bit. It could possibly become a short-term rental. Some places have done that. I'm not trying to stir the bucket on that. I'm just saying that's one of the definitions that some places have used for it. Just visual examples of maybe what an ADU can look like in an urban environment. We even have these already in the city, believe it or not. They might just be going by different names. You have the basement or the interior ADU. walk down the stairs, there it is. Separate entrance, you have a complete living situation. One of my personal favorites is the carriage house or the detached ADU, which goes over a garage. For me, that's the low-hanging fruit in Lancaster. I think that's something we can see a lot of movement done in a very succinct way. And then there's also studio, attic, or again, another kind of interior ADU. I'm not sure if the picture I showed with that is exactly by definition what it is, but the idea that, again, you have a separate entrance, a separate way you can get out to the street without cutting through the rest of the home to get there. We've already talked about this in 2023 when we did our comprehensive plan, our future Lancaster. It specifically envisioned the idea of an ADU, and it calls on us to create a clear approval pathway for property owners looking to add an accessory dwelling unit. And essentially, we're supposed to use our powers to help reduce the regulatory barriers to get to that. It's right in our plans that we spent lots of time thinking through, consulting with others, so we have the kind of initiative to do that. Another strategy on the next slide would come from the 2015 Lancaster City Alliance Plan, Building on Strength. Same idea. They suggested a development clearinghouse, which would establish a one-stop shop to facilitate really less experienced developers and businesses, and make it possible for people who don't have legal teams, who don't have engineering teams, but who have maybe that desire to work towards this goal of providing housing, to just provide the resources that we as a city can do and through other means to make it happen and really help bridge some of the gaps. And then, of course, thank you, by the way, for bringing this to our conversation. Here's our current ordinance, I guess would be the best way to describe it, right? And this is probably a good launching point for what it would actually involve for today's discussion, for tonight's discussion, kind of what the actual ordinance looks like that we have right now in the books. Maybe a place that we can launch from there. I want to come back to this slide in a minute because I know we'll probably actually want to stare at it and kind of really look at the words, but I have one last slide before we get to that. I want to just also throw out some brainstorming ideas for the commission, or even the public for that much. We always love public input on this, but brainstorming ideas for actually implementing it. Things that have worked in other places, things that I know would work here, providing one-on-one technical assistance to applicants who want to do it. Hosting periodic workshops or educational sessions for potential applicants. One of my personal favorite ideas is creating a catalog of pre-approved building plans for ADUs. What happened after World War II? Seriously, there's like a Sears catalog of buildings that you can choose from and you can build. And I think we can do this as a city. We can find some common plans that would work. We can reduce city fees as well. We could bundle some of these ideas together and make it very palatable for people to jump in and say, hey, I can do this in my backyard. And finally, we could make a decision to either maybe permit all internal attached and detached ADUs by right, or maybe we could permit all internal attached or detached ADUs by right in some of the districts, and then make it a discretionary use in other districts. So we have a lot of ideas here. I know I just said all that, and I think it was under 3 minutes. That was my goal in case I had to do public comment, and that was lightning fast. But thank goodness they're on slides. We can go back to that if we need to. But I hope that gets the ball rolling. I don't want to hear my voice anymore. It echoes. We have such a full commission here, but I hope that helped get the ball rolling a little bit. Thank you for allowing me to start the conversation.
I really appreciate you putting the presentation together, Andrew.
Thank you.
Actually, I'll put some momentum in this rolling ball, I guess. Because I think you're right. We especially need the help of facilitation of those sort of projects. And I know something that not a lot of people realize is, so let's say you want to put an accessory dwelling unit over your garage. So fire code starts to become a big thing then. because the code requirements that you potentially need sprinklers, I believe. I think it'd be interesting if we as a commission could get, a codes official in here sometime and have kind of an open discussion about certain scenarios. It might help us when we're working on zoning revisions, because we'll know what certain building types are possible based off certain constraints like code. And I'm just going to throw it out there. I mean, maybe it helps us as a city determine maybe we need to make some amendments to those more concerning codes, like fire and building code. We do have the ability to amend those things. It's just you have to be more intentional because it could open you up to liability.
So I have a question, just kind of what Mr. Dasher was just saying, made me think about this. If you guys recall, when we talked about the short-term rentals, and there were some safety concerns regarding short-term rentals and how they are managed and monitored, essentially regulated. There are, so in the case that a short-term, an accessory dwelling unit would be used as a short-term rental, not a long-term situation, I think that they should be held to higher safety standards, particularly if it is above a garage unit. I think there should be considerations or thoughts about how we can ensure that that unit is safer from a short-term rental standpoint, because my thought is, and I have no validity to this, is that in some cases, I would think that some people aren't going to care about that space from a short-term renting situation as you would in a home that you're going to live in for a long period of time. Whether that is you're purchasing that home or you're renting that home from somebody else, you're going to care for that particular property differently than you would if it was a short-term rental. So I just say that because I think it should be thought of from a safety factor as we continue this conversation. I'm really excited about it. I think accessory dwelling units can offer a lot, particularly when it comes to a variety of rent options and affordability. I also think it can help certain homeowners maintain their home and make that a little bit more affordable as well, and lessen the burden of, just lessen the burden of things. So safety is a concern, and I don't know what the right answer is, but that's where my thoughts went.
Yeah, I would just piggyback on that. I like the idea of thinking about short-term rentals. I mean, I agree with the safety point, but I think one of the challenges with ADUs is just they're expensive. I mean, everything is expensive to build, so as a way of incentivizing more ADUs, if there was a way to allow them to be short-term rentals, makes it a little bit more feasible, I think, for the property owner. I'm also curious, I don't know if this question is for Betsy or Lauren. I would be interested in looking at sort of all of the regulations around ADUs, so there's like lot coverage, there's setback. I still am curious about the alley access requirement, and if that's something that most other cities are doing. So I think right now you have to have public alley access, you get a variance for common alleys. That really limits the number of places where you could do ADUs in the city, because a lot of our parcels don't have alley access. So I understand, again, from a safety perspective, but is alley access like a real requirement, or are there other variations, or is there something that's less rigid that still allows it to be safe? So those are some of my questions.
Amos, one of the things I was thinking about when these ideas were kind of being put into a slide was that take rock or ice or some of the streets, at least in the northeast area where I live, and how it's an entire block of just garages. Something like that would be an easier one for me to visualize and to be able to say, let's put this on a map. This is an area we can make plans for, versus some of the other places with the shared alleys or really impossible backyards to get to, where, yeah, really not in my backyard, it shouldn't happen there. It would make more sense for other places. Yeah, you're right. There's a lot to think about with that.
I will say that Betsy and I have reviewed what's called a model ordinance, and we have one for the local level, which we thought would be helpful to share after this conversation. We didn't want to give you all of that and then also, bring all of that into the conversation. But it's very interesting to see kind of what the model ordinance would include and kind of use that to figure out what would fit in Lancaster. There are some kind of research examples. I think, Andrew, you might have alluded to that during your presentation. You just have to really be careful that they fit. And so sometimes, the cities that have the research are also cities that are maybe a little bit ahead of the city of Lancaster in terms of their open-mindedness to alternative housing. So, the research is limited, and the research that is out there is sometimes slanted toward cities that don't have a lot in common with Lancaster. And so, that being the case, there are often takeaways. Like there might be an appendix that shows some really worthwhile information to a report. And so you say, okay, well, the report doesn't really, cover what we need, but this appendix is great to have as a resource. And so I would always encourage you to look for those things. I also have been doing some of that. And like I said, I did assume that after this meeting, when I send out the minutes, I'm going to also send along that model ordinance for your consideration.
Great. And then, Lauren, just maybe a quick question. So right now, if you wanted to build an EDU, how does the utility hookup work? Is it a separate utility hookup, or are you going off of the other building?
You're going off of the other building.
Okay.
So that was probably my biggest question, was just getting public water and sewer to these ADUs, and the challenges around that. Andrew, I think it's a great idea, and I love the idea of having some conceptual architectural plans that could maybe help some people. I think the reality is that you're going to get a different building every time that you do it, and each one of them is going to have their own code challenges that you'll have to meet. So it can't really be I don't see it personally ever being a pre-approved building floor plan, but I do think it could be helpful to show, minimal space requirements for kitchens, things like that, and kind of fit them to the space that you have. I think that would help, certainly, especially for someone who doesn't have the resources to hire an architect or an engineer or something like that in order to do it. But
remind people what 400 square feet looks like.
Right, yeah, it's very tiny. But yeah, and we kind of talked about this, Betsy, at the City Alliance meeting, but I think the public utility thing is probably the biggest question I have, is if I have a building in the back of my house, which I don't, but if I did, and I wanted to build, or I wanted to have somebody live there, can I connect to the sewer line, and what would be the process in order to do that, sewer and water?
Yeah, I just wanted to add on the model ordinance, it was prepared by AARP, but it is being sponsored throughout the state by the PA Housing Coalition and the Pennsylvania American Planning Association. So that's where we got the reference to it. But it is something that obviously is a statewide issue, and it's one way to encourage doing this. I think an assessment of what lots might work, if there's lots that have existing, the mapping component I think would also be really important, because we can highlight which properties that would even work for if you're doing a detached one. I think where our current ordinance kind of conflicts with stuff is if you are allowing both a detached unit and an indoor unit, so say it's in your basement or whatever, and are you then, is that a residence? Is that turning into a duplex, or how do you distinguish between the two? Because that's not really another principal use. So I think that's one of the things that needs to be considered.
I was going to ask, kind of similar to what you alluded to there, an indoor unit, essentially you're turning it into a multi-unit, right? Like an indoor accessory dwelling unit. You're saying you're taking a single-family home and turning it into a two-unit.
Right, and I think it depends on the size, and I think that's where the nuances in zoning are what really need to be looked at. But to your point, it's not just utilities and the street. I think stormwater is also one of the issues if you're doing one. And I don't, Lauren, I don't know if you want to share kind of the feedback you got on that.
I don't suppose, is it Tom? Tom is here, and so he is the one that actually sent the email and it triggered this conversation. So I don't know if you wanted to just bring him up now versus waiting for like public comment, or I'll defer to you.
I can move.
Come on up, Tom. Just make sure you give us your name and your address, please, for the record.
Sure thing. My name is Tom Reiner, and I live at 335 Ruby Street in the southwest part of the city. And I saw the announcement in the agenda that this would be discussed today, and I was very interested in this because we are currently in the process of building an ADU. Our lot is kind of unique because it's a little bit bigger compared to the other lots on the site. It's a detached four-square from 1923. And there's an existing garage on site that we demolished. We went through the zoning approval, we went through historic approval, and we're trying to submit to stormwater and building code for approval. And I mean, I'm interested in taking what I've learned and kind of helping other people to do this, because I think the ADUs are a really great thing to have. We're doing it's a one-bedroom dwelling unit above a two-car garage. And so the total square footprint is 690. I think I had said 790 in my email, which was incorrect. But then once you include the eaves and everything, we have about a 1-foot eave, then you're looking at about 800 square feet for the ADU. It's not massive, but what you end up is you run into stormwater issues. And my email, I was saying that, I understand the importance of not dumping our sewage into the Conestoga River, and I totally agree with that. But on the ground, it's a very hard thing to work with. And the stormwater team, Angela and Kate, are very good to work with. I have no complaints. But the difficulty of keeping an ADU project under 1,000 square feet is significant. Because in our case, you're looking at 800 square feet for just the roof. And then by the time we added on sidewalk and then a little patio area, and to my surprise, I figured out that, or I understood that like even a staircase, like a wood stair coming up, even if it's not attached to the ground, is still considered impervious. I'm not sure why, because I figured that the water would just go through it and into the ground. But then we found ourselves, slightly above 1,000 square feet, and we're looking at it trying to nip and tuck and trying to keep it under 1,000 square feet. But then at a certain point, we figured, we just got to do it. We just got to swallow the pill and do it. And by the time you get into a large stormwater plan, then you're looking at dealing with a civil engineer to do a stormwater management plan. You have to have a surveyor come to survey the property to do the topography of the property, and then you have to have a geotechnical engineer come, and then they'll dig pits on the site and then test the percolation of the site. So we've gone through all of that. We've developed a plan, and the soft costs associated with that are probably going to be around like $17,000. And then the cost of actually doing the infiltration bed that we're looking at, I don't know, probably going to be about $10,000 to $15,000. I'm not exactly sure. So what I would suggest is that if you're looking at any ADU project, you have to consider how it's going to interface with some of these other requirements. And, I've thought a lot about it. I don't know what allowance there is, what a possibility there is to bump up the threshold from 1,000 square feet to, say 1,400 square feet, 1,500 square feet. I don't know if there's an allowance for being able to take some credit for existing impervious on site. In our case, we're actually reducing the total number of impervious area on site, but we still have to do the stormwater solution because, the goal is to get rid of all, impervious in the city of Lancaster, or to have some sort of a management process in place for all of these locations. So, I really like the idea of doing the ADUs, especially above the garages, but you have to understand that for the garages, I'm actually also a structural engineer, so I know that in order to put a dwelling unit on top of the garage, you probably have to rip down the cinder blocks that are there and then dig a substantial foundation, and then by the time you're doing that, then you're getting into, a pretty significant project. And if there's any ability to kind of massage some of the requirements to make this one thing a little bit easier, I think that'd be something to really think about.
Tom, do you have a sense of how much, total cost this is going to be for you if you are able to get this thing built?
Yeah. I mean, we're going to be able to do it. So it's just, more expensive than we thought it would be.
Could you give me a ballpark figure how much total cost you'll be in?
I mean, for the garage and the ADU, I think the latest number is 130.
How many? So, what was your total square footage? How large?
The footprint of the ADU is 690.
Okay. But it's over 1,000 square feet that triggers the large stormwater.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's what.
So yeah.
Sorry, how many square feet are you?
Well, it's 1,000 square feet of new impervious, and then I think 3,000 of disturbed earth.
Everything counts, so even a patio or a sidewalk that runs next to the house, next to the ADU, all of that is considered new impervious.
It's 5,000 earth disturbance.
5,000? Okay, thank you.
And
Thank you.
1,000 square feet of impervious, or existing impervious that's disturbed.
Right. Yeah, so it was really the footprint plus the eaves that you have to consider, and then plus whatever sidewalks or patios we had. It all goes into the same bucket.
Question for you, because you are building one with a garage. What fire code requirements do you have to abide by for the garage? You do need sprinklers, right?
No. Not under the current building code.
Okay.
There's a 1 hour separation that's required.
1 hour separation.
So 5/8 inch type X gypsum.
Okay. So
That's
just
between the garage and
separation.
Between the,
Yeah, that's between the garage and the dwelling unit up above.
if you didn't have a garage, it would just be a normal structure.
Correct, yeah.
I appreciate you sending an email and being a little open with us about the process you're going through, because unfortunately, partly the only way we're going to make this more affordable for other residents is to know the pains and the experience of people like yourself. I hope that when your project reaches completion, you're open to sharing documents with us and other residents, so maybe we can use that as a model. I agree with Commissioner Hackett that we're definitely going to see sites with unique conditions, and it's hard to just cookie cutter things, but at the same time, we have a lot of the same size parcels in the city, and I do think that something like Commissioner Whalen is proposing, having a packet for people, could be viable for a sizable portion. So just thank you for being open with us, and I hope it continues.
Yeah, sure thing. Thank you.
Just out of curiosity, is this ADU will you rent this for additional income at your property? Will you keep this for family, or what are I'm just curious what are your intentions?
I mean, our intentions are to rent it.
Yeah.
In a long-term situation, and then if the need arises, to make it available for family.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure thing.
I also just wanted to add, this was a very timely conversation because in my work I recently came across the Alley House project in Bethlehem. which is a really interesting project if you have the opportunity to read about. An alley house. It's a historic form of ADUs. You can see them around Lancaster as well. It's all the little two-story row houses that are in alleys all over the city, at least where they haven't been all demolished for parking. And they actually did, I think, a lot of the things that we've been talking about today, where they took I don't recall if they hired a consultant to do this or not, but they took a full review of the city, identified all the places where it was possible to build alley houses, proposed changes to their zoning ordinance. And I think right now where they are is they are identifying specific homeowners who are willing to engage with the project, and there might be some sort of fundraising partnership where they actually assist the homeowners to actually construct the ADU. So a lot of parts that are outside of the zoning ordinance, but I think it's a really interesting model, and I can provide a link to it for folks, or just look up the Alley House project in Bethlehem. I think it makes for a very interesting read. I think it also points to, and again, this is outside of the planning commission, the zoning, that there just might have to be some partnerships involved, fundraising involved to make, at least at the beginning, in conjunction with a lot of the ordinance changes we're proposing, to make constructing ADUs for homeowners a more affordable prospect. So partnering with a lot of the same folks who are already engaged in the affordable housing scene. How can we work together with them to, if we do find homeowners who are interested in getting involved in this project, especially if, they may be of lower income homeowners, folks who are on a fixed income, who are needing sort of that extra income stream to be able to stay in their homes. That's a potential opportunity to get involved. But anyway, I thought that was just within the last couple of days. I looked that up. So
thank you, Porter. I just pulled it up on my phone.
Yeah.
And the alleys look very similar to what we see in Lancaster. So I think that would be a great resource. So I appreciate your bringing that to our attention.
Yeah, it's hard to sometimes find examples that aren't like Portland, Oregon.
Exactly.
So it was really nice to find something that was in Central PA.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. I was at a conference a couple months ago where they presented about that. I think in some cases they're using manufactured housing to lower some of the housing costs. But yeah, I think that's a good model to look at. And then just to, again, piggyback on Porter, like what I often see in my work is we have a lot of, we have large homes, and we have a lot of single people on a fixed income living in a 4 or 5 bedroom house that in some cases they own outright. But, they're older, it's hard to maintain those homes, it's hard for them to age in place because of the stairs. In a lot of cases they have large parcels that would work for an ADU. And if we could figure out how to get that ADU built, move that person into the ADU, which is a much more, suitable house for them, allows them to stay in the neighborhood, age in place, and then get rental income from the house, while also maximizing, the bedrooms that you're using in that house, because the family ideally would move in. Like, we need to figure out how to do that kind of stuff, because the opportunity is definitely there. So that's my spiel. I'm curious, Lauren, do you know how many ADUs do we have in Lancaster?
No. We are hoping to potentially get an intern this summer.
So, to build an ADU, you have to go through the land development process, right? So do we just not track it?
So it doesn't necessarily go through the land development process. And so it generally goes through zoning. And so there have been like a couple of tiny houses that have been built, and those are in land development. The other issue we have, in full transparency, is again, the software that we use does not make it easy to track things from department to department. So I could be tracking something in land development and it's being tracked in zoning or even in codes. And to connect all of those things, even on a single property, becomes really messy. And so we're hoping, without putting too much faith in a software program, that our new software will be able to provide us the ability to create some of those reports and track things more efficiently.
Okay. Makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, I just also wanted to add some things to say. I think that as part of the conversation about ADUs, as it ties to short-term rentals, we need to be mindful that, the use can impact the return on investment for people. That's a factor in these conversations. I think another factor in the conversation is the complexity of the resulting zoning changes overall that we produce. I'm not a huge fan of the way we do use-based zoning. I'm more of a form-based zoning fan myself. That being said, I have some philosophical exceptions, but if we create a zoning code that's easy to follow with not a lot of complexity, I think that will help encourage development in the city, not only for ADUs, but other forms of development as well. Because the more complex your code is, the more time and money you have to spend in staff time, which is another component of cost when it comes to these projects. So, those are just my final thoughts on ADUs.
I think this has been a really good, productive start. It's just a good kickoff. So I appreciate this being brought to our attention.
Thank you, Andrew.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. Excellent idea. I think the ADUs, I don't know if you envision them to be families or single units, mostly single units, perhaps. That's what I'm thinking, especially based on the fact that the cost is high for a larger unit. But bottom line, we do need housing, affordable housing in the city. And hopefully we can move forward with this and begin to not make things as complicated as they are now, as you mentioned, Commissioner Dashner. So, good comment. Any other public comment? Yes.
Hi, sorry. Good evening, my name is Phil Stump Kennedy. I am a member of the Traffic Commission. I live on the unit block of Chester Street in Southeast, and I'm just encouraged to hear you all talk so much about the affordable housing crisis and about some ways that we can be aggressive in confronting that. I'm really supportive of ADUs. I would like to see, the minimum number of requirements possible to make it as streamlined and as easy for folks as possible. I love the suggestion of preset designs. While they might not work in all circumstances, there are a lot of cases where people are going to win a build over garages. So like having something ready to go that someone can just grab off the shelf, I think would make it a lot easier. I also want to say in regards to like the alley access, I know that we have a lot of blocks like mine where we don't have an alley, but we do have space in between the houses, so they're basically duplexes, even though they're kind of like row homes, where there is street access, and so I would encourage you to be open to situations like that, so that you don't eliminate a lot of potential housing in the city. And related to the zoning rewrite as well, I just encourage you to be as aggressive as you can in finding ways to allow more housing. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other public comment? See, we have distinguished Ms. Paula Jackson here. Did you want to say anything?
Very interested in the process and I'll be talking to you.
Okay. Good to see you. So, do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
Yeah, motion to adjourn in a second. All in favor, let it know by saying aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Ayes have it. Meeting adjourned at 6:57.